Well, of course, everybody's aware of the need for filtration. And of course, that all has to do with material filtration. Everything that we deal with in regards to water is done on a physical level. We're just looking at the physical structure of water. We're looking at the physical attributes, the physical particles that are held within the water. And I wouldn't even say we're doing a good job of filtering those out, because actually the most effective ways to get particulates out of water is with reverse osmosis. But that system is not considering the energetics of water, the invisible attributes of water. And it's just like anything else. It's like us. Without our spirit, without our soul, we have no personality. We have nothing, right? We're just a blob. It's nothing. Yeah. And in the same way, water without energy, it's something, but it's not worthwhile. I mean, it's not going to contribute. The more energy that's in it, the more energy, the more benefits it has.
Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today's guest is water expert Gary Greenfield. Gary's fascination with water began at a young age, but it wasn't until later in his life that this fascination flourished into something much larger. His passion for understanding the natural governing principles of water motivated him to travel the world, meeting remarkable individuals and performing simple yet mind-boggling experiments whilst observing nature and water in their unique forms. His renewed appreciation and love for water led him to start Greenfield Naturals, a company devoted to research, development, and marketing of water structuring and energizing products built using technologies which mimic natural principles. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and a warm review on the podcast platform of your choice. Your opinions matter, and your ratings help us to grow and help more people to be healthy, find freedom of body and mind, and to live their dreams. A big thank you to our premier sponsors, Bioptimizers, Paleo Valley, and Organifi, our podcast sponsors, Ned and Wild Pastures, and our preferred product sponsor, Peak Life. Their support is essential in producing this podcast, and we hope you will show your support by visiting them online and trying all the amazing products they produce. Please check the show notes for links and details at chekinstitute.com/podcast. Paul and Gary are talking today about water essentials.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Living 4D with Paul Chek. Today I have a very important topic. It's water essentials. You may have heard my previous podcast with Elizabeth Friend, where we got really deep into the spiritual aspects of water. Today we're going to talk with Gary Greenfield, who is Ben Greenfield's father, and he is the founder of greenfieldwater.com, which I highly, highly recommend you all visit for your water cleaning, charging, energizing needs. And there's a lot of great educational content, some really cool videos there. And we're going to talk about a lot of the things about water that we all need to be aware of. We're going to get into everything from filtration to all sorts of neat things you can do with your water. And fortunately, Gary's website is probably the best website I've ever seen, with very high quality products at real reasonable prices. And the service I've gotten from working with Greenfield Water has been excellent. His son, Zach, works with him. He's a super, super cool, intelligent, friendly guy that's very, very helpful. The whole team at Greenfield Water is super helpful. But today I'm going to access the brain behind it all. So Gary, welcome.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Gary, to begin with, I'd love it if you could share a summary of your background and what led you to, one, having such an interest in water and ultimately starting Greenfield Water Solutions.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've always been around water in one form of another. I grew up in South Florida, so I was exposed to every water sport known to man while growing up there, which was wonderful. It was a wonderful blessing. And I believe just actually hanging out at the beach, surfing, diving, fishing, being, on the beach sand, in the ocean water, I think it all really contributed to protecting me from so many of the toxins that were, even in the food and water at that time, which was in the 60s and 70s. So I was very grateful for those opportunities. But after I also went to college for ocean technology. And and learned. Now I was, rather than learning all the sports oriented activity, I was learning all the vocational activities such as welding, photography, biological sampling, anything to do with working around water. And but when I was about 21, I left that and headed out to Idaho. I decided I wanted to go into farming, and doing so, I came out to Idaho, in Moscow, Idaho. That was 1975. I got a job with the Empire Farm Chemical Company. I knew nothing about farming. I had a spiritual crisis in my life after having, attained really everything I wanted in life. I knew what my vocation was going to be. I had a wonderful girlfriend. I had all the things. I had traveled the world, and by the time I was about 21, though, I felt there was a void in my life. A spiritual void is what I determined it to be, because physically I had everything I wanted. So that's what led to me leaving Florida to head for Idaho. I thought maybe a different pursuit would fulfill that void or that emptiness that was in me. So I determined, just by reading an atlas, because at that time, of course, there were no computers. And reading through the atlas, I was naive, a young kid. I read about Idaho, and it said Idaho is God's country, and it had these beautiful pictures of mountains and forest and lakes. I thought, that's where I want to go. So I
Cool.
thought, I want to go to God's country. I want to meet God. And so that's what I did. But it was a great letdown in one way, in that I went to work for this farm chemical company, and all I did for months was move chemicals, handle chemicals for these farmers. And I realized, in some of these chemicals, if you handle them wrong, they would kill you. Like anhydrous ammonia, it just sucks all the oxygen out of the air. You breathe it in, it sucks all the oxygen out of your lungs, and you could die. And I thought, man, I wasn't into natural things or anything. I was just, kind of following my intuition. And I thought, there's something right. If this is what farming's all about, I really don't want to have anything to do with it. So I left farming, and eventually I got a job as a fireman. So I got involved with water again, of course, because, it's what we deal with all the time, is using water to put out fires. And then, of course, in order to be a firefighter, I had to become an emergency medical technician. So I worked the ambulance. I did that for 18 years. I was in EMS for 18 years, 12 years with the city, 5 years of having my own business. I had an entrepreneurial bug, which I think came from my father. So, and plus, when everywhere it's just in me to always look for ways to do things more efficiently, economically, and effectively. And I just couldn't deal with all the waste that I saw in the city system, the city operation, the fire department. So I thought, well, I'm just going to start my own. I thought that's the American dream, start your own business. So I did. It led to a lot of trouble, of course, with the firefighters and the guys that worked for the city, but I was very successful. And after doing that, I got involved with coffee. And again, there's a water element to that as well. That's really what, contributes most greatly to the taste. But I still, all of my interaction with water was just, it was vocationally related. It was just part of my job. But then I turned about 50, and there was a young lady sharing dinner with us at our table. We used to have a lot of college kids over, and she shared with us how she was healed. Her mother was healed of breast cancer by a raw food diet.
Oh,
And
good.
that just blew me away. And that led me onto a path of learning everything and anything I could about natural principles, natural foods, just anything to do with natural healing methods. And I spent about 3 years. At the same time, unfortunately, I had a separation from my wife, and so I took advantage of those 3 years to I lived in the woods in various places around North Idaho and on the islands in Puget Sound. And I spent 3 years in deep study of just studying natural principles, natural foods, natural healing methods. And finally, I got to water. And I was reading a book by Victor Schauberger, who's really the 20th century visionary. He understood water and the effects of what modern technologies would have on it more than anybody, in the past century. And of
Yes.
course, up to the 20th century, nobody really thought about water as being problematic, because there were no real technologies that could, abuse it or contaminate it in any way, really. I mean, there was just, of course, the ongoing issues of sanitation, and things like that, and making sure that that your waste matter was separate from your water, and that's been an ongoing issue for all of mankind, of course, and even today with all of our advanced technologies, we still have issues with that, but not nearly as what they used to be, but on the other hand, sometimes in some ways they're worse because now not only are we not separating wastewater from our drinking water, we're actually creating drinking water from wastewater,
I
which
know.
and and based on modern science, that's not a problem because modern science looks at water solely as a physical entity, and we don't address the energetics in science so much. So they're not considering the contaminated information that's within that purified wastewater. So there's issues with that. But anyway, so I began to learn about water, and in doing so, I was invited to a Kangen water demonstration by a friend, and I didn't know what a Kangen machine was. I didn't know what water ionization was, but I thought it was about water. This sounds very intriguing. It's a new concept, so I thought I'd like to learn about it because I was just ferociously absorbing as much information as I could about my environment from a different perspective than I had for all of my life. And so I went to that presentation, and it was very well done, and it's probably the same presentation they do today, and this was back in 2009. And and it all came from this machine that was plugged into the wall. And I looked at that machine and I thought, I didn't know anything about the machine other than it was plugged into the wall. And I thought, they're claiming to create water that's, better than anything you can get from the tap or from nature. It's just the best water there is. I thought there's no way that you can outdo nature with with modern technologies, with something that's plugged into a wall. I thought there's got to be a way to do this that's natural. So that sent me on a quest, and I ended up going to Asia and meeting with various people that were involved with different water-related technologies. And in doing so, I met a medical professor from the University of Korea in Seoul, and he was using the invisible energies of water to heal people. And at the time, and it was just very fortuitous. I mean, that I would even have dinner with this gentleman, and that he would share with me what he was doing. Didn't speak English very well, but it was enough to communicate. I could understand. But actually, when he was explaining to me what he was doing, it was like listening to somebody speaking Greek. I understood it, but I didn't. I understood what he was saying, but I didn't know what he was saying.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I had no idea. I thought, I don't understand these concepts. This is something completely new to me. So I came back to America, and at the time, I had also determined from Victor's work that vortexing was a very integral part of bringing water back into its, of contributing to the natural attributes of water. That was part of the hydrological cycle that was the most neglected and most misunderstood. And at the same time, I believe God put this on my heart because I don't know where else it would have come from, but because I had no background in science other than, I'd gone to school and gotten a degree in modern day science, but I didn't understand energies. I didn't understand the invisible attributes of creation, because they were invisible. And it's not something I ever thought about. But I just got this download, this vision to take advantage of this non-sacrificial attributes of elements, to infuse them into water, and then to feed that water to a crop. And so that eventually, it's like birds of a feather flock together. And I began to find people that could be integral in helping me attain that vision. And so that's what got me involved with structured water and where I'm at today.
That's quite a journey. It's a lot of interesting pieces, and I call that the golden thread when you find out you're being led to the right people at the right places at the right time to get the right information to do the right thing.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, that's exactly it.
My next question is, do you feel there are things about water that native people around the world knew that we have lost touch with? And if so, what are the consequences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one of the downfalls of Western culture is the destruction of tradition, the destruction of just a lack of appreciation for passing of information from one generation to the next. It's like no more. Grandma's remedies are not respected among the mainstream medical community. And in the same way, much of the history of mankind, as interpreted by modern historians, is looked upon with like, oh, they knew less than we did.
Right.
We're so much more advanced today. We put such a high value on the word and the concept progress. Well, I would contend that progress is not what it implies. It's actually a sliding back into a state of barbaric behavior in the midst of all this modern technology. That's what it's leading to. It's leading to a separation of our soul and our flesh, and creating these roboton, a roboton society where everything is run by machines, and people are no longer appreciated, for their gifts and attributes. But I would say that the ancients, they knew very well, and we have indications of that. For instance, we consider the Greeks, right? The Greek philosophers, Aristotle and Meletius and others, they were only from about the 500s. So that's 2,000 years ago, 500 years, before the time of Christ. And of course, that's how we measure time in our culture. And Aristotle stated that Meletus was one of the seven wisest men that ever lived on earth. And but yet we have none of his writings today. They were all passed on orally. So what we do know is that his belief was that everything came from water. Everything. That
Yeah.
water was the seed of all material, of everything material in the world. And that is congruent with an even more ancient writer, Moses, who wrote the story of creation, as supposedly given to him by an angel, because of course nobody was there in the beginning. All of our theories, and of course the most prominent theory today that's taught all over the world in every university is the Big Bang theory, which was only developed in the last century. And it was based on, it makes no sense. It's not congruent with anything from history, from ancient whatever fables, myths, historical narratives. It's completely separated us from the past. And I think that's part of the problem with our modern science, modern history, modern knowledge. It's turned truth on its head. And now we call false, that which is false truth, and we base these truths, these so-called truths, on principles that make no sense, they're not congruent with natural principles. And so we have Moses, who wrote the book of Genesis, which is, included in the most popular book that's ever been written in the history of the world. There's no book that has more respect and more scrutiny than the Bible. And the history is, at least the history that we know of that can be corroborated, is confirmed. The history of things that we say, oh, this couldn't have happened. Well, then they find, scrolls or, writings of history that confirm these different historical events that are portrayed in the scriptures. But he was writing about 3,500 years ago about the beginning of creation. And in the first sentence of the first book of the Bible, it says that God was hovering over the waters. And the waters were he was hovering over the deep. And then later on, he says he was hovering over the waters. So whatever it was, and then he said it was hovering over the deep and the waters, and they were dark. So it was like you couldn't see anything. It was just there. And there was nothing else. It was just darkness. And then he created light. And when he created light, I believe that is where we can confirm. And I think modern physics has it all wrong, where they talk about how matter becomes energy becomes matter. They go back and forth, and we don't know what's what. And I believe that energy is energy, light is light. It's the same thing, and the ether is filled with energy. And so we're surrounded by this light everywhere. And it's not a visible light, it's just energy that manifests itself in a visible spectrum, but also in many other spectrums. So on the first day, we have the waters that were there, and it says that he created the light. It doesn't say he created the waters. He said the waters were just there. So
Right.
we don't know anything other than that mystery that he was just hovering over the deep. The waters were there, but there was nothing there. It was darkness. But then he created light. So we know he created light, but the waters were in the beginning. They were primordial, and we can't explain their origin. We can't, and of course we can't explain the origin of God. So these are two great mysteries, but we can read the rest of the creation story, and it makes so much sense in that on the second day he separated the waters from the waters. So, but now we've got light as another component. So he separated the waters into the heavens, and then he has separated the waters down below the heavens. And then on the third day, we have him creating. I think it was the third day he was creating night and day, and setting up the stage for the universe as we know it, the creation as we know it. And then on the fourth day, he separated the waters and created the seas, and out of those waters he drew forth the land. Well, what I believe the land came from are all the elements. Of course, we know that land soil is composed of all the elements of the periodic table, right? I mean, they're all there, every one of them. Well, where did they come from? They came from the water. So the water, again, is the primordial reservoir from which everything that is material came. And then from there, from with those elements, again, he created all the plants and the animals, the birds and the fish, and then he created us. And of course, we are elements as well. But along with those elements, you can't have any activity, you can't have any life without light, because light is what activates. Light is it's an energy source. So you've got those two combinations, but then you have a third component, which is the artist himself, who is God, who infused life into this combination and he took various combinations of energy, or actually the energy is everywhere. It took various combinations of elements to create different forms, different animals and fish and plants and all the creatures and also the stars and the sun. He took elements and then he created these forms that then interacted with the light, which then created frequency or activation, and that's where you had life. But that component that really brings life is that God is the consciousness of God, the will of God, the act of God, the creative act of God, bringing life to all these different elements and energy. And what's interesting is on the fourth day is when all the stars and the sun, after he'd already created the earth and after he'd already created plants, he created the sun and the moon and the stars. And of course, he created those for our benefit, for seasons and for calendar and for times. So in doing so, what the indication there is that the earth is the center of the universe. The sun was created for us, the moon was created for us, the stars were created for us. And science would contend that that's not true. They would say that the universe is ever expanding, that we're flying through space at we're spinning around at 1,000 miles an hour, and we're moving around the sun at 60,000 miles an hour, and the sun and us and the system is going through the universe at 500,000 miles an hour, and that the universe is expanding at 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's like incomprehensible, all this action, all this speed. Whereas when you sit on top of a mountain overlooking a beautiful mountain lake, and you see all the trees around you and you see the sky and you just sit there, it's complete silence, complete stillness, unless there's wind. But how does that indicate these absurd actions that are carrying us through the solar system at 500,000 miles an hour? It makes no sense. And what it does, it takes away from the sacredness of mankind being the center, because after God created everything, the last thing he created was mankind. And the thing was, he did not speak us into existence. Everything God created, he spoke into existence. But when it came to man, after he created everything, it's like he was doing this for a purpose. He created man with his own hands, which meant that there was going to be a connection between God and man that was unique among all of creation. And he created us not only with his own hands, but it says he created us in his image, which again contributes, shows that sacredness, that holiness, that uniqueness, that special nature that man has, that of course science again would deny and say, oh, we're just animals that evolved, And the whole modern scientific movement and philosophy and history and everything contributes to that concept that no, we're just a blob that evolved from single cell protozoa or whatever, and we're in this creation that's incomprehensible, that's just expanding, and it's we can't understand it. And that's the complete opposite of what the ancients understood, because all the ancients, if you look back, you'll see they all have a version of that creation model that I just explained to you, which has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with modern conceptualization of life in the universe.
And water is in almost every creation myth as well. I mean, I wrote 3 chapters on water in my new book series, and I put probably a dozen creation myths in there. I could have put 20 of them in there, but every single one of them begins with water. And I think that's something that people have forgotten. I'm just curious, in your studies, have you found correlations between ether, AETHER, like Einstein's ether, and water? Because many of the researchers I've studied and my own spiritual investigations have shown that water is actually a physical correlate of ether, which is that which all the planets and stars are in.
Yeah. Well, of course, we're immersed in ether. I believe, it's not only my belief, but it's my interpretation, and also the interpretation of many ancients who say that we are in a womb. We are in a dome, under a dome, and that dome is really a huge womb. What does that mean? It means it's a place where that's supporting life that is evolving into some form that's going to eventually come into the world. But that's beyond this world. I believe that this womb is here to take us into the kingdom of heaven, which is something that's mind-bogglingly more than what we are experiencing in this womb of life as we know it. We're not in an unconscious state in this womb. We're in a very conscious state. But I think that most of mankind does not understand what we were made for and what our potential is for the future. But in saying that, as far as ether goes, yes, ether is contained within this womb, or within this dome, within this firmament, and that ether is the light. That ether is energy. That ether is information that manifests itself as it interacts with various elements and elemental compounds, which is all material forms. So the ether, we can't know material forms, and that's water or anything that's any material form. We can't know it without energy, because energy interacting with a material form creates a frequency. And those frequencies are what we decipher and to interpret our world. So those frequencies manifest themselves, and to create what we see and hear and feel. So their energy or light or ether is completely separate from the material aspects, but all material forms, all elements in their compound forms exist within this ether. But we cannot know that, so we can't know one without the other. So they play off of each other to manifest to us what our reality is.
Hi, everybody. This year, our way of talking about Chek Black Friday is a sale with meaning. This is an opportunity for customers to spend their money on something that will help them be their fittest and healthiest ever, and to help clients do the same. All sales cover our online courses plus Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 1, which is our general public health essentials program, and Holistic Lifestyle Coach Level 2, our professional training program, as well as Integrated Movement Science 1 online, which is ideal for anyone that wants to gain a holistic mastery of functional exercise. If you purchase one online course during our Black Friday event, you save 10% on your purchase. If you purchase 2 online courses, you save 20% on your purchase. And if you purchase 3 or more online courses, you will save 30% on your purchase. Sale begins at 12:01 on Friday, November 24th and ends midnight on Monday, November 27th. For incredible savings on the world's best holistic health and exercise education, go to blackfriday.chekinstitute.com. Once again, that is blackfriday.chekinstitute.com. Don't miss out on this opportunity to save a lot of money on the best courses I can create for you, your family, your friends, and anybody in the health and fitness industries worldwide. Lots of love. Another observation that I've made, and I would imagine you've made the observation as well. Are you familiar with Marcel Vogel, who is very famous for his work with crystals?
Yes.
I've got a very expensive Vogal cut crystal for healing work, and I use it for various other things, such as charging water and medicines and healing practices. But I've had this experience before, but never so much as when I got this Vogal crystal. It's about, 6 inches long, maybe inch and a half at the one end and a point at the terminated end. But when I hold that crystal in my hand, it literally feels like water that is frozen in time. And I've found that when I work with a lot of really high quality crystals, which I have quite a number of, that I get this sense, my intuitive sense is that there's somehow a deep connection to water, almost as though it is just like wood can petrify. It's almost as though the crystal is somehow a symbolic or physical expression of water in a more dense form, just as alchemists talk about earth, water, fire, and air, not as physical substances, but as ranges of vibration. The sense I have is that the crystals, and it may be crystals throughout the world, have somehow got some kind of a vibrational relationship to water. Have you ever picked up on that yourself?
Yes. And I would interpret that as the crystal is water. It's water that is in a state that's been created by form, which is then manifests its function, which is then known by the frequency. So,
Yeah.
so it's not something that evolved over time. It's actually what you're experiencing is the consciousness of God is determined as what he would do with elements in a particular form that he drew from the waters, and that he had a particular function for those crystals, that they benefit because everything in the world works together. And
Yes.
we are truly connected. And when we see when we hear about the internet of everything, and this connection of everything, well, there's nothing new under the sun.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a corrupted form of what nature is all about.
Yes.
Everything is connected. They're just unfortunately, what we're experiencing today, and what we're going to continue to experience more of, is this mimicking of nature, but in a dark way,
Yeah.
used for dark purposes.
Yeah, it's like the thought that comes to my mind. It's like a cheap copy, like a forgery.
It's exactly what it is. It's a very cheap copy because what it represents, the interesting thing, everything is connected in nature, right? Well, how does it connect, or what's its purpose? Its purpose, all the elements in their very primordial elemental form, as well as in their compound form, or in their forms that create the trees and the animals and the fish and the birds and humankind, they all manifest the consciousness of God because of the creation of God. But what is the consciousness of God? It's to what is the if you could describe it in 3 ways, you would describe it as the whole purpose of nature is to clean, feed, and protect. And
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about Mother Nature, we're really talking about a mother, but we're also talking about nature.
Yeah.
So the primary purpose of a mother is to clean, feed, and protect her baby and her children and her family. That's what she does. There's nothing else. It's all the entire definition. And that's the definition for men as well. It's the definition for everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is there to contribute to cleaning, feeding, and protecting everything else around it
It's
in
a
one form.
beautiful. I just want to say that I've never heard it presented that way. I got to give you a hat off for that one, because that is really a beautiful description of nature. And I think the other thing you mentioned, the consciousness of God. You said, "What is the consciousness of God?" And then you mentioned the three things. But I would say, if there's one other way to encapsulate the consciousness of God, it's life itself.
Well, absolutely. But what is the purpose of that life? You could even take this down to one word. You could make it more succinct of what I just said. And that is the consciousness of God is manifest itself in nature in all of the creation through it's a manifestation of love. That's it. What is love?
Yes,
Love is cleaning,
exactly.
feeding, and protecting. There is nothing more to love than cleaning, feeding, and protecting. Everything that encompasses that word is manifested in those three activities, those three functions. When you're involved with those activities, you're developing frequencies that are congruent with nature. And that's why natural
Yes.
frequencies are so invigorating, illuminating, they're healthy, they just make you feel good. And that's because you are in congruence with nature. And yeah, so that's basically it.
See, I will take that in one step of a reduction and say that ultimately love is relationships, and everything in nature is in relationship to everything else.
Absolutely. Yes.
There cannot be love without relationship. There's always
Absolutely.
an I thou. One of the definitions I give of love is the flow of energy and information through empathic and compassionate connection to self and or other. And so that's a human conception of the self or other, but everything, if you look, for example, at the mycelial network throughout the entire planet, it's like the nervous system of the whole planet, and the amount of chemicals and the amount of amazing things that mycelial network does, and the destruction that we're doing to that with farming chemicals is beyond even, it's hard for me to even give people credibility for calling themselves scientists for destroying the very fabric of life, and calling that validated by science, because it's absolutely destroying the intimate relationships that we're describing as love, but are the cleaning, feeding, and protecting mechanism of the whole planet. And that is really inherent to our discussion of water, because water is the ultimate agent of connection and the flow of energy and information. There's nothing more important to life itself than water. It's really
Yes.
liquid love, actually.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yes. The component to all this that I think brings the most fulfillment is, our whole purpose here was we were created to have relationships, just like you mentioned. Without relationships, we can't know love. And yet, the greatest relationship we could have is with the one who created us to have a relationship with him. And that's the God, our creator. He created us to be one with him. And it's a very beautiful thing when we can become one with God.
Well, it's the ultimate.
Yes, there is nothing greater than that. And but that's yeah. So the process of doing that is not well, it's not promoted, it's not talked about very much. I believe just as there is light and there is darkness, there's light that's mixed with darkness. There's substances that are pure, substances that are very toxic, and then there's a mixture. And I see the whole recipe or of how to become one with God as being falling within all of those different realms, because we have many cultures throughout history that have developed religions that have given us the guidelines for how to become one with God, or something to that effect, how to achieve a higher state of being or whatever. But I think the
Mm-hmm.
highest state of being we can have is to become that which God created us to be. But that's a great challenge in our time, especially in these end times, because we're doing so much to hinder that. And of course, we see that in the world around us. And, unfortunately, every family that aspires to send their child to college is really sending them into an institution that is training them to destroy the earth, which is very sad
Yes,
because
it is
it's the
sad.
bottom line. That's
Yeah.
that's it. Well-meaning children, parents are well-meaning. It's not like they're evil in any way, but they've been deceived, and they think that we've been told so much, time and time and time again. It's repetitive, that these technologies are going to help us, and we got to develop more of them. And you can become a scientist, and you become a chemist, you become a virologist, and all these disciplines. But what they're learning are principles that are destroying the earth. Although we
Well, they're
get,
all materialistic. That's the problem. It's all materialistic science.
yeah, and there's the talk about, oh, we're making a greener earth, but it's all based on, we're not doing anything to benefit the earth, based on these popular concepts and principles and promoted through the academics of the world.
Well, yeah, that's why I like talking to people like you that go out in nature and connect with nature and let the wisdom and guide intelligence of nature, Sophia, the wisdom of God consciousness, which is creating and is in everything. It's what lives and breathes and animates it all. So my next question is, which I'm sure you know, most people simply assume water and generally think it's just water. Some are aware that city water has many contaminants in it and buy bottled water instead, not realizing that many bottled waters are just filtered tap water, but pick up a variety of contaminants sitting in plastic bottles over long periods of time. And when it comes to general knowledge everyone should have regarding water, what do you feel are essentials that everyone should be aware of, and what are the consequences of not being aware of the essentials? So what are the key things that people don't generally know about water but need to be aware of, and what's the consequences of not being aware of those essentials?
Right. Well, of course, everybody's aware of the need for filtration. And of course, that all has to do with material filtration. Everything that we deal with in regards to water is done on a physical level. We're just looking at the physical structure of water. We're looking at the physical attributes, the physical particles that are held within the water. And I wouldn't even say we're doing a good job of filtering those out, because actually the most effective ways to get particulates out of water is with reverse osmosis. But that system is not considering the energetics of water, the invisible attributes of water. And it's just like anything else. It's like us. Without our spirit, without our soul, we have no personality. We have nothing, right? We're just a
Yeah.
blob. It's nothing.
Yeah.
And in the same way, water without energy, it's something, but it's not worthwhile. It's not going to contribute. The more energy that's in it, the more energy, the more benefits it has.
One of the things that people don't realize about water, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, I suspect, the human being, to be here as a human being having a conversation like this, you first have to be alive. So it's our life force energy, which you could call our spirit, which is what animates the soul. The soul is what's having the experience of life. Spirit is what's enlivening it. And if you drink water that is not alive, we'll call it dead water, you actually have to use your life force energy to enliven the water that in nature is what enlivens you. And so I think, the most common complaint given by patients seeking doctors worldwide today is fatigue. The number one reason for physician visits, and the last time I researched it, was fatigue. So what the point I'm making is, when people keep thinking of water as just water and all the things we've been discussing, they don't realize that all this water that they're drinking is devitalized dead water that is not being handled based on the principles of nature and is full of toxic chemicals. So when we drink it, not only are we bringing in this huge toxic burden, but we're bringing in a water that is really the shell, the physical shell of living water. And the paradox of it is you hear things like Dasani advertising, 7 times filtered. That means you've 7 times taken the living things out of water. My research on water showed that water has 3 essential elements: energy, chemistry, and organisms. Real water that's living water is full of life. And today we have this germ phobia. So everybody wants to filter the life forms out of water, which are actually giving water life that makes it a viable source of not only energy, but nutrition, like at a microscopic level. And so, in order for water to be really vital, it has to have natural energies in it, such as the energies of the earth, the elements, and the sun. It has to have the right chemistry to be healthy, or it's toxic. Or even if you look at the pH, if it's too alkaline or too acid, it throws your body out of balance. And it has to have living organisms. And we've managed to screw all three of those up and sell it on television called 7 Times Filtered, which is in many ways 7 times dead, because you and I both know the filtration systems they're using are not going to be the kind of filtration systems Greenfield water would be selling. So I just had to interject that in there.
Yeah. Well, you just answered the question. But thank
Sorry.
you.
Well, if there's more you want to add, go ahead.
No, that's okay. No, I just concur with everything you said. That's a very good breakdown of water. It was an excellent breakdown.
Thank you. What is the general state of water worldwide today? For example, what are some of the things that are damaging our oceans, lakes, rivers, streams, watersheds, and wells that are the consequences to nature, wildlife, that have consequences to nature, wildlife, and human beings? So I'm asking, in summary, what is the state of water worldwide today? And what are some of the things we've talked about some of them, like farming chemicals, but what are some of the other things that you think are really damaging water on a big scale? Oceans, lakes, rivers, streams, watersheds, and wells.
Right. Well, I mean, if you go back to the root of the problem, it's the consciousness of mankind. It's our
There you
intent.
go. That
Yeah,
sort of nails it down.
that's really it. That's. I mean, everything falls under that. It's the
Yeah.
corrupted, brokenness, sickness of mankind who is screwed everything up. Whether we intended to or not. So those in the highest places of power, that own these huge corporations that make all the chemicals and that do all the medical stuff. There's a few at the top that are in the know. They know what they're doing. Exactly. They know who they're serving. They're serving Satan. They're serving the dark forces, the dark powers. But
Yeah.
virtually everybody under them, except for a few here and there, are well-meaning human beings that just want to make a contribution, to society. They want to they want to have a family. They want to take care of the kids. They want to, have a meaningful existence. But they get caught up in all of these corrupt practices, and then they get stuck because they got to pay their mortgage. They got to pay off the car. If they lose their job, what are they going to do? So it's fear-based. So,
Yeah.
but ultimately, it's the brokenness, the sickness of mankind that has led to this, and what we see around us is not the fault of anything but our own intentions. Period.
Yeah. So if we went one step beyond that, for example, I interviewed Dolph Zantinga, one of the top water researchers in the world, and he worked for Fritz Albert Popp in his lab and was the director of his lab. And I don't know if do you know who Fritz Albert Popp was or is? I think he's still alive.
Yes.
So, he's the one that first identified biophotons and biophoton emission in plants and water and all sorts of stuff. But anyhow, so he worked in a very elite laboratory, and he showed that they did tests with water. They measured the vitality of it, the structuring of it, and all they had to do was put a cell phone that was turned on next to it for even a few seconds, and it completely damaged the structure of the water and devitalized the water. So one of the things Dolph Zantinga brought up as a very serious concern is now that we have 42,000, soon to have as many as 60 plus thousand 5G satellites beaming all that 5G energy into water. And he says, there's a real concern that this could completely devitalize and obliterate the function of the water on this planet. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that, but I'm interested in any other things that man's genius has created that most people are completely unaware of, but need to wake up to.
Yeah. Well, I would say that there are numerous technologies transmit 5G, not 5G, but can they transmit toxic EMF? Yes. Land-based antennas transmit it? Yes. The electrical grid system for the entire world? Yes. All of those, anywhere where you have energy moving through space, you have the potential to carry toxic frequencies or beneficial frequencies. And the entire system all over the world has been developed based on toxic systems. It's kind of like, when you think about Tesla, he's really the father of all of our modern technologies, wireless technologies, computer tech, the internet, just cellular communication, on a robotic or a material level, because cellular communication is what happens. Like I said, Tesla didn't invent anything new. Cellular communicate, he just identified it and was able to harness it for beneficial use. But unfortunately, he also harnessed it for very dark uses, which today we don't even know about. The government knows about it, and I believe that the technologies that have not been brought to light by the science community or by our government, which got a hold of these technologies.
Yeah, oh yeah, I agree with you. Yes, and I've got plenty of science to back that. I spent a year in electronics school in the 82nd Airborne Division. My training was to repair weapon systems on Cobra helicopters. So I have enough of a background in electronics to be able to read books. And if you go all the way back to the study and use of radionics, for example, I'll give you a simple example. You may know about this, but I think it was all the way back in the early 40s using radionic technology. There was people that I can't remember exactly what state they were in, but basically what they found was that the chemicals that were being used on farm crops were so poisonous that they wanted to come up with another way to get rid of pests. So what they did was they used a radionics-based device, which was like a radio transmitter, and they would take a small dose of a pesticide and, for example, if they wanted to kill the potato worm, they would use a chemical that was known to kill the potato worm, but they wouldn't use the chemical. They would just put a small amount of it in this radio device, which is using a crystal and a radio transmitter, and they would broadcast the frequency through the fields using this radio transmitter, and it could do quite large areas, and they had a 98% kill rate with no toxicity, just sending out the radio wave. Point being, they learned a long time ago that they could attach a chemical signal to a radio wave and without any of the physical chemical on it, actually kill those parasites. Ibrahim Karim, the founder of biogeometry, has shown, and if you go to Gaia TV and look at Robert J. Gilbert's series on sacred geometry, episode 4 is featuring Ibrahim Karim's work, and it actually shows experiments where Ibrahim Karim, using energy devices that he designed specifically to channel energy at the right frequencies to strengthen nature, would wipe out parasites with a very high kill rate using completely natural, non-toxic means. And the punchline of all this is that what happened was DuPont Chemical started getting reports from their salesmen all over the place that people were not buying the chemicals because there was these people using a radio device that were killing the parasites at a fraction of the price. Like they'd do an entire, couple of thousand acres for as little as 20 or 30 bucks, which is, microcosm of the expense of these chemicals. So then DuPont Chemical started tracking these people down. And when they figured out what they were doing, they turned that information over to the United States government in short order. Men in black suits showed up, confiscated the radio device and said,
Right.
If you can kill insects with this, you could also use it to kill human beings. Therefore, it's a threat to national defense. And that was all the way back in the early 40s. The point being, they've had this technology for a very, very long time and could easily broadcast a frequency and would make people sick and obliterate their cells. And then you got Royal Raymond Rife, who was able to measure the frequency of a cancer cell, and using sound frequencies and light frequencies, particularly sound frequencies, could obliterate cancer cells using nothing but sound. And they confiscated his technology and his microscopes that were far beyond probably anything we have today. And so my point is, we've had these technologies a long time, but most people are so kind of railroaded by their pseudo false education. They don't realize what's potentially going on. And I've talked about this to many people, even very intelligent people, even with people with backgrounds in science and electronics. And they tell me I'm crazy. I'm like, anytime you want to sit in my library, I probably got a good 15 books detailing this in detail and showing that Carnegie and Rockefeller have been researching for almost 100 years how to use frequency to control people's genes. And look what we got now. All these
Right.
tracking devices and frequencies. And if you read the book, The Invisible Rainbow by Arthur Firstenberg, he shows whenever they put up new radio towers or radar systems, outbreaks of influenza happened. So it's like people just don't put the dots together. They're too busy watching television and believing all that shit.
Right. Yeah. Well, we believe in all things visible, but we don't believe in all things invisible. And that's been an intent, of our controllers, because once you, as you've stated, you grasp an understanding of the invisible qualities of energy and its interaction with elements and how that can affect our environment, then you neutralize all these huge corporations that are making a ton of money off of these material drugs and chemicals, which aren't needed.
When people have that belief that they don't believe in things that are invisible, I have a very simple little experiment for them. I ask them, can you see your thoughts? And of course, everybody says no. I say, well, they're invisible, but they're very real because they either turn you into a healthy, happy person or a very sick person. So there's your proof of the reality of an invisible world, your thoughts.
Yeah. Or even the downloading of a movie onto your cell phone. I mean, where does it come from? It's not connected to anything. Yeah.
So we've covered some of those things. Is there anything else you think is contributing to the damage of the overall world water supply other than what we've talked about? Obviously, chemicals.
Well, obviously, what's happened in our modern times is the deep state, the deep science, dark state, whatever you want to call it, has gained a tremendous understanding of invisible energies, and they're using them. They're corrupting their purpose. Their purpose is to benefit, to clean, feed, and protect, to be a benefit to us. And so but yet that's a very undercover, secretive activity that's been going on. They're very good at keeping it covered up. But, basically it's the combination of those corrupting energies, which they're bathing the entire earth with, through transmissions. And that coupled with the chemicals of corrupting all the elements. So they're corrupting the energy and they're corrupting the elements. There's nothing else to corrupt, other than, well, what I mean by that, there is something else to, ultimately it's going to corrupt us. It's going to take away our quality of life to the point where I believe suffering will occur on earth as has never been known since the history of mankind because of what they're doing today in the physical and invisible world.
Well, I think that's already the case. I mean, we've got children being born with arterial sclerosis. I recently saw a report from Children's Health Defense that they've done blood tests on infants, and the average infant tested had I think 126 or 129 toxic chemicals at high levels in their bloodstream, and they just came out of the womb. We've got extremely high rates of obesity, disease, anxiety, depression, suicide levels are through the roof in all age categories. So I think the suffering's definitely here. I think people have just become so accustomed to think that it's normal to live a life of devitalization and illness that we're really imploding. And out of curiosity, have you ever seen the book study Pottinger's Cats?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it.
Oh, well, you need to look that one up. You can get it from the Weston A. Price Foundation or the Price Pottinger Foundation. But Pottinger basically did a landmark study, and it was done in the mid 40s. I've got it. I've read it several times. I use it in my teachings in my institute. But in a very quick nutshell, what he did was he did something very simple but very profound. He had 900 cats in the study. It was a 10-year study, and basically the only thing he did was he gave one group of cats raw milk and raw meat, straight out of the cow milk and raw meat. And then he gave the other ones pasteurized it was either 3 or 4 grades of pasteurized milk, all the way to that kind of condensed canned milk, which was the worst. And he cooked the meat. That was the only difference. 3 different grades of pasteurized milk and cooked meat. By the 3rd generation, the rates of fetal malfunction and abortion were extremely high. The cats became extremely diseased. The 4th generation became extinct. By the 3rd generation, the cats lost their athletic ability. You know how you can throw a cat in the air and it'll always land on its feet? They would land on their heads.
Oof.
They lost their sexual orientations. Males begin having sex with males and females with females. They were completely confused about their sexual orientation. And then they basically became extinct because they couldn't give birth anymore. And then when he took them and tried to regenerate them by feeding them raw milk and raw meat, it took 4 generations of rebreeding to get them back to where he started with. And so the reason I bring that up is because if you look at that study on cats, which have many of the same biological systems and cell systems that we do, and even a lot of the same genetics, they were losing their sexual preference and becoming very diseased and lost their athletic ability after 3 generations of processed, which is really cooked and pasteurized, cooked food and pasteurized milk. And we're several more generations down the road than that. So we're like, if you look at Pottinger's cats, it's kind of like the weather report for what happens when you destroy food by cooking it too much and pasteurizing milk, which, as you know, means there's no enzyme activity in it. And enzymes are what produce life. So you can see that a lot of the so-called ideas that are backed by nutrition and science are actually destroying the ability for a human being to have common sense and even sexual preference, which we now know is a huge debacle going on.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the podcast today. I've got some excellent news to share with you. The Bioptimizer's Black Friday mega sale is in full swing. And guess what? It's not just one day. It's happening throughout the entire month of November. This mega deal is available only for my listeners with my code. Yes, you heard me right. It's our little secret. Now, you already know that I have unwavering trust in Bioptimizers. These guys are the real deal when it comes to improving digestion. And let's not forget their top-of-the-line magnesium. It's truly the best on the market. Plus, they back up their products with a rock-solid 365-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. And you know damn well if they were selling junk, they would never do that. They'd go broke. And I use these things every day. I only offer them to you because they work. Now is your time to fill up your shopping carts and stock up on Bioptimizer's goodness. Trust me when I say this, you won't find a better Black Friday deal anywhere else, not even on the mighty Amazon. And these are not just ordinary supplements. As I said, they work, and I do use them every day. And I'm best buddies with Wade Lightheart, the co-founder of Bioptimizers, and he's a spiritual man that would never mess with people. He puts his heart and soul, as does his partner, on creating products that really work, and they do tons of research on this stuff. If you haven't listened to my podcast with Wade Lightheart, they're very good. This is the biggest discount you can get, so why not stock up while you're at it? And get some amazing early Christmas gifts for people you love. And there may even be some gifts for you with purchase that are available on my page, which is BIOPTIMIZERS. That's Bioptimizers, BIOPTIMIZERS.com/living number 4 little d. That's bioptimizers.com/living 4D with the code Paul 10, that's little Paul 10. This Black Friday, I challenge you to put your health at the top of the list. Instead of impulse purchases, why not focus on what really matters? Your health and that of your loved ones. Don't miss out on this mega deal for my listeners only. Head over to bioptimizers.com/living number 4D and enter the code Paul 10 at checkout. I promise you, you will look and feel better because you did. Lots of love. Happy Black Friday shopping. Gary, chlorine, chloramine, and other chemicals are added to public water supplies worldwide. What are the consequences to plant, animal, and human health when these additives are used? And what options do we have for filtration? Are there portable solutions that people can use when hiking or traveling? Now, I obviously know there are some, but I wanted to see what you had in your mind. And once you get to the right point in your answer, I'd like to tell a little story about chloramine that happened to us here, because I think you'd find that very interesting. And I think it makes a very important point people need to know about. So I'll let you go first with your answer to that one.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, I believe that if we structured the water, once when a city utility obtains water, it typically comes from a well. So it's being sucked out of the ground. When you suck water out of the ground through a pump that's not congruent with natural actions, and you suck it through a straight pipe, which isn't congruent with natural actions, you're de-energizing that water. You're sucking all the energy out of that water. And when we're pulling it out of the lake, typically, or the pond, or a river, a body of water, typically that water has been subjected to either chemical contamination already, energetic contamination through EMF, or through a breakdown by flowing through a dam, or just by that, because dams inhibit the natural actions of water. So much of the water, and if they wasn't contaminated in its original source, by the time they're done with it, it's contaminated. So the problem is how we're dealing with water. What I found is that when we vortex water, we're adding to the life energy of the water. We're adding to the capacity of that water to carry energy when we vortex, because we're expanding the molecular structure, which allows for the drawing in of more information, more light, more energy, more frequency. And by doing so, the water is less subject to any kind of breakdown. Or in a low energy environment, you have pathogens. We identify them as pathogens, but I would contend that that's a misidentification. I would say all microbes have benefits. It's how we had, for instance, E. coli is definitely beneficial. Why? Because it's breaking down fecal matter. But we focus on the germ or the microbe rather than the environment. And that's called the terrain theory. But of course the entire world is oriented towards the germ theory. So the germs are evil, and that's what they focus on. So we never do anything about the environment, which is because of us. Instead of blaming us for the environment we've created, like with water, instead of blaming us for the condition we've created for this life depleted water, we're blaming it on the microbes and saying the microbes are the problem. Well, but yet the microbes are just there. They're either garbage eaters if they're in a contaminated environment. For instance, pests show up on a crop because because the crop is in a low energy state, and they're there to break down material forms. So we've got to look at the right perspective. It's just like you mentioned about killing all those pathogens. Well, the problem wasn't really the pathogen. They're not looking deep enough. The problem was the energy state of that crop. Why was the energy state of that crop depleted? Well, one, they were probably being fed energy depleted water, or else they had some kind of supplement, fertilizer program that was introducing, toxic frequencies, or too much of a perhaps of a good, an overload of a good frequency, perhaps into the, there was just an interference with natural processes, or a misunderstanding of natural processes. And it's the same thing with water. If the water was structured, vortexed, infused with beneficial energies, it could pass through the pipe system. The pipe system would be cleaner because you wouldn't have a low energy environment where all the biofilm is building up. And I believe if you place structured water devices in strategic locations throughout a city, I don't think you would need chemicals because what are chemicals? Chemicals are simply elemental compounds, period. That's all they are. They're taking their natural elements and breaking them down to create this chemical. A chemical is not a natural thing. Today you talk to a chemical, he can't separate between what's natural and what's synthetic. It's like it's chemical, it could be natural or not. Well, no. Elements are made to clean, feed, and protect. So there are ways to introduce elements into the water which will clean, feed, and protect the environment, whether as they're being transported. The problem is that we're putting these chemicals into the water, which are corrupted elemental compounds, which detract from life. So they encourage the buildup of biofilms. They encourage the proliferation of so-called pathogens, which are just microbes, and thriving in a low energy environment, trying to clean it up. And that's not the time when we should be drinking the water. So that's the problem. So yes, I think it could be fixed by just respecting water, respecting natural processes, natural principles, and putting them to work. But it's not going to happen without a tremendous amount of marketing. And then perhaps, I don't know the problem is that the entire world is completely addicted to chemicals. And these 3M and DuPont and Bayer and all these huge
Monsanto, Bayer,
they're all going to they're going to ensure that these chemicals continue to be produced. The pharmaceutical companies, so once a technology and a technology disruptor like our devices comes into the market, once it comes above a certain level, they're going to step in. They'll step
Yeah.
in, either the government agent. It's either going to be, they're going to get you, they're going to take you down one way or another. That's my belief. I've been doing this since 2009, and all I can say is that the technologies that are most effective are the ones that create that they've created an environment where they're the most feared, or else the technologies that are the most effective are the ones that are completely ignored. And so what they do, they don't go into a farmer, they don't go into a market and talk about all the myths about structured water. They'll go into a market and talk about all the benefits of their product, and if you get off of them, you're going to lose your crop. So they just ignore us and just focus on making sure that farmer, or that technology sector, whatever it is, wastewater treatment, the medical community, that they are in dire fear if they ever reject the products that are being proliferated through these big corporations.
Yeah. So I'll tell you a story, and it's also a story for the listeners because it's important. We have a company here that does carbon filtration systems for our house. We have two great big, like 5 foot tall, like they look like oxyacetylene tanks, the big giant carbon filters, and they're designed for pulling chlorine out of the water and other contaminants, as carbon filters will do. And we get them changed out every month on schedule. And I started noticing, as did Angie and Penny and even the kids, that our skin was drying out and getting really itchy. And it felt just like you feel when you swim in a swimming pool with too much chlorine in it. And I'm like, what the hell's going on, man? I pay every month to have these filters replaced. There's no way this water should be doing this to my skin. So I started asking the girls and the kids, and they're all having the same effect. So I got, next time the water guy came, I said, what's going on? Because my skin's drying out and I feel like I'm bathing in chlorine all the time. I said, are you guys using used filters, or what's going on? He said, no, we're giving you the new filters every month and whatever. And so I said to Penny, would you contact the water board and see if they've done anything to the water? Lo and behold, without notifying anybody at all, they switched from chlorine to chloramine. So I researched chloramine, and lo and behold, the symptoms I was having are exactly what happens with chloramine. And the problem is, filters that are structured to remove chlorine will not remove chloramine. So all of a sudden, I'm paying all this money for these filters that aren't doing a damn thing for me. And they
Yeah.
never told anybody. And the number one cited excuse for water boards switching to chloramine is that it's cheaper than chlorine, but they don't tell anybody. So all these people out there, they're spending all this money on water filtration systems that are not designed to pull chloramine out, think they got clean water, but they got very toxic water. So I just wanted to open that can of worms and see if you have any thoughts that are important for people to realize on an issue like that. And are there other tricks they're doing to water that you know of that we should all know about?
Yeah. Well, to deal with chloramines, you would use catalytic carbon, which is just a different form of carbon. But, anytime they use these ammonia-based chemicals or these fluorinated-based chemicals, they're very difficult to remove from water. Chloramines, or at least they're easier to remove than the fluoride, which is very difficult to remove. So yeah, it's very challenging to deal with chemicals because we're dealing with thousands of chemicals, and we're learning about new ones all the time, like these PFOAs. The proliferation of chemicals in our water supply, as well as our food supply, and in the air and the soils, is increasing. It's increasing at an ever increasing rate. It's kind of like titration.
Yes.
You keep putting the drops in the test tube and more, and eventually you get to that last drop, and it just overflows and it has a reaction. And
Yeah.
that's what we're headed for. And I don't believe we're only, I believe, in the early stages. Even though we've been experiencing, this contamination of the food supply and the water supply and the environment, big time, probably since the 50s. I
Yeah.
think that we've entered into the second stage, which is going to carry us into a higher state of pollution and destruction and it's going to do it very quickly. I think the past 75 years went by in 75 years. I think the next, I would say the next 5 to 6 years, up until 2030, are going to increase dramatically. We're going to see some dramatic increases in pollution of water, food, the environment, medicine, everything. Everything is going to just be increased. And I think it's all part of this great reset they're talking about. And of course, I think
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
and this was the first ramping up. They turned the dial up significantly, then they turned it back down. They're going to turn it up again. It's even going to be worse than the last time, I believe. And they're going to continue to do this.
Yeah.
And the indication will be by how many people die, because the
Yeah.
ultimate goal here is to bring the population down to 500 million. And they
Yeah.
just did a pinprick on this first one, but they're going to become more serious as time goes on, because that's the way they acclimate us to this environment, to these events. It's kind of like the frog in the boiling water. They just
Yeah.
turn it up gradually, but they
Yeah.
get to a point where everybody knows what's going on, but they can't do anything about it. And that's where we're headed right now. More and more people are beginning to realize what's going on, but we're not going to be able to do anything about it other than to take, to save ourselves and our loved ones and those around, and that's going to be a challenge. um,
Yes.
I mean, it's doom and gloom, but I only say that balanced on my own spiritual perspective about what's going to come after all of this. But I believe that life on earth is not going to be good for this next generation. But I also believe and I believe that, they talk about climate change, and we know, the last cataclysmic event that destroyed the entire earth was water, actually. It was the
Yeah.
Great Flood. Some would say it's a myth. I would say it's a fact. It can be proved by geological formations and, manifestations as you look on the earth and you see these, how a flood could have occurred that was worldwide. But the next time the cataclysmic event is going to be by fire. And we're going to see a disintegrate. We're not going to see it because it's going to be over by, we will have been removed from this earth, everybody. And this is where I believe, that God in his mercy and in his perfect ways will intervene. We'll see an event that will result in the complete disintegration of all matter and energy not energy. Energy will be in a primordial state, but because all the elements will be taken down to just their elemental level, to where it will go back to being the just the waters again. Everything will go
Mm.
back to becoming, it'll burn up and become the great deep, and then God will pray the great reset. Everything that happens in the world is not new. It's all evil just can copy what God does. And the demons know what's coming, and they're copying what they know of, what the future holds, because that resonates with truth. Because if it's something that is based on a God, created precept, it's going to ring with truth. So we say, well, there's climate change. Well, yeah, there is, but maybe not in the way it's being explained. But ultimately, there is going to be a cataclysmic climate change, and that will mark the end of the world. And there's, I could have volumes and volumes and volumes to describe all the ramifications of that and how that's going to happen. But I only say that to state that I believe there's hope, that can only come by becoming one with God. Once we become one with God, we'll be, God is indestructible. You can't harm God. And if we're one with God, he will make us indestructible, in the sense that our bodies, the government agencies or whoever can destroy our body, but they can't touch our soul unless we give it, unless we give it up. And that's where we will be indestructible. And if we trust in that, and we're one with God, God will give us a new body, and that body will live forever, eternally. We'll have eternal life with God, with that soul, which, our soul will never destruct. It will just continue on in whatever growth state we're in. But it's in the body, this body will pass away, but we'll be given a new body and we'll live forever in oneness with God. But for those who do not want to be one with God, as God meant for us to be, then God will give them over to the desire of their heart, which would be, apart from him. But to be in God's presence, he's a consuming fire. The energy of being in the presence of God it could annihilate anyone. But for those that are one with God, that energy, that fire, that light will be a great source of warmth and peace. But for those that do not desire to be one with God, it will be an energy, a consuming heat and presence that won't destroy. It'll be in a state of destruction, but you'll never die. And there's nothing that would be a description of hell. And that's a place not that God sends somebody to because he wants to. It's because that person doesn't want to be with God, and to be apart from God is to be in hell. To be with God is to be in heaven. And there's only two places. It's like good and evil, light and darkness. It's either one or the other ultimately. So I explain that only because I have a great hope in what's to come after this great tragedy that is occurring before our eyes, that's never occurred in the history of the world. At least you
Yeah.
could say it happened in the flood during, up to the time of the flood, but it's happening again, actually.
Yeah. I mean, I understand your position, and I think, there's a wide variety of beliefs and practices and philosophies. So I will avoid diving into that because it could get into a very other kind of discussion than our intentions for today. I think that the gist of what you're saying is very obvious, though. I mean, clearly, if you just take the word God and replace it with nature, then you get the same basic thing. If you've become disconnected from nature and you act in ways that exemplify that ignorance or that hubris, then ultimately you're acting in ways that create disharmony within nature. And ultimately, any disharmony with nature is a force of death, not a force of life. So for those that may not have this orientation toward a Christian conception of end days and all the kinds of things that are nested within your philosophy, I think that the fundamental issue that you're talking about, as I say, by just replacing the word God with nature, you come to the same basic conclusion. But then if you say what happens next, that gets into a religious or a spiritual philosophy for which people can have their own. But the truth is, anybody that does have heart-centered connection with God, regardless of what their religion is, because there's only one God behind all religions, otherwise you have a fake God. We all know that God ultimately is love. So whenever you're disconnected from love, then you invite evil. And if you're connected with love, we know it because you live in a way that exemplifies that, which does not include destroying the fucking planet, period. So I think philosophical camps apart, we end up in the same place. And so I think that's what's important for everybody to think about. And one of the reasons for my podcast is to wake people up to the kinds of things we need to be paying attention to. And what I tell people all the time, and I'm sure you'd agree with, is the political system's been rigged and screwed for a long time. So hoping your next president's going to rescue you, although RFK is a good shot for somebody that will actually do something. But the point I'm making is the real vote is with your dollar. So if you put your money into the practices, the organic farmers, people that are taking care of the planet, taking care of water, that are conscious people, that are nature conscious, then you're actually putting energy and life into the things that are sustainable. So I think if there's anything we can all do now, we need to start really becoming aware of the primacy of water and the primacy of food, and the clean nurture. What was it? Clean, nurture, and protect.
Clean, feed, and protect.
Clean, feed, and protect. So if we don't orient our consciousness and our money towards things that clean, feed, and protect, then you don't need to look. Just think, if you're a parent, if you don't clean, feed, and protect your children, they're going to be sick and dead. If you don't clean, feed, and protect yourself, you're going to be sick and dead. I grew up on a farm. If you don't clean, feed, and protect your animals, they're dead and you starve to death. So I don't give a shit whether you're an atheist or a Satanist. You still have to clean, feed, and protect, or you can't even play your silly game as a Satanist. So my point is very simple. If there's one message coming through Gary that I concur with, we better all start clean feeding and protecting instead of being sidetracked with video games, shitty drugs, pornography, and all the shit that doesn't do anything but demonstrate to the fact that you need more cleaning, feeding, and protecting. So that's how I will synthesize that, just to make it a little bit more religiously neutral.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I think, because I study mythology very extensively, and I've studied many, many myths, and I've studied world scripture for a long time. I've taken entire courses on world religion, the history of it, etc. So I know there's a lot of different angles you can come at. And I think why that's important is because we obviously have different belief systems exemplified by different religions in even different regions of the world, for the Eastern religions, Western religions, for example. But ultimately, all the religions hinge on one common denominator: love and respect for life. And if that part is overlooked, and then you get caught in all the religious, shall we say, canons and dogmas, which just become legalese at that point. So if we stick to the clean, feed, and protect, then we all are on the same religion, which is the foundation of life itself, which, regardless of what's going on in the world, you're either contributing to life or you're contributing to death. I mean, it boils down to that. And so my goal for having people like you on the podcast is to inspire people to clean, feed, and protect. And I love that. I think that's something beautiful that you've shared with all of us today, that I think is absolutely, we got down to love and relationship and clean, feed, and protect. And so everything we're talking about is doing that better, and water being primal to that. We have to really be conscious of what we're doing with water, which leads me to my next question. There's a lot of talk about water structure, but I know very few people actually understand what the hell that means. So could you give us an overview of what structured water is, why it's important, how it actually occurs in nature, and share what structuring methods that you offer through Greenfield Water? Because having studied all of Victor Schauberger's books myself and many other experts on water, I'm very hip to what you're talking about. But even if you look at Steiner's flow form technologies developed, very similar to Schauberger's, and Schauberger and Steiner were in the same period and come from the same region of the world, basically. Seems there's a lot of geniuses that come from that part of the world. But the point that I'm making is Schauberger and Steiner both used, from a scientific perspective, what would be considered very, very simplistic technologies that were, a pipe bent with the angles and geometries that match the flow of a river, for example. Now, not many people would think that running a water through a pipe that has the right geometry to match the flow of a river or a stream would do anything, because most scientists would say, well, that's just stupid. It's nothing but a pipe. And so, this is the gap. It's almost like that's why they say PhD stands for piled higher and deeper, or progressive head death. And I think that's just terribly true too often. But maybe you can give us Einstein said, if you understand something well enough, you can teach it to a 12-year-old. And if you can't, you don't understand it. So give us the 12-year-old's explanation of what structured water is, why it's so important, and what Greenfield Water Solutions can do to offer you a way to take dead water and turn it into structured water. Because once we understand why that's important, then we'll also understand why looking into those technologies is important.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think I'd start with an example which you can relate to, and probably most of your audience can relate to, and that's working out. When you
okay, we can start there.
Yeah. Okay. So, working out is basically in a contraction and expansion motion, right? Everything
Yes.
you do is you contract, you expand. And if you do that correctly, you get a nice physique. If you do it incorrectly, you're going to get injured, right? And then pull a muscle. Okay, so what are you building up when you're contracting and expanding your arms or your legs or your abdomen? What's being built up to give you that structure, that that sculptured physique?
Protein.
Okay, well, that's interesting that you say that, because it's muscle is 1% protein, 99%
water.
water. It's 99% water. So what's going on there? Well, I think this is a very simple way of showing what vortexing does. When you have an expansion, contraction, a left turn, right turn, centrifugal force, centripetal force, these are opposing actions that are natural. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so the more you do that with your body to a certain extent, the more you expand your muscular, your physique. You get more
Yeah.
structure. What's going on? You're pulling in energy into the water because
Mm-hmm.
you're doing two things. You're pulling beneficial energy in, and you're expelling the waste matter that's being created by your activity. And so
Yeah.
that's what the centrifugal force does. The centrifular pulls in beneficial energy from the ether and from the environment, which is going to contain, of course, your body's going to, the other component there is nutrients, right? The better you eat, the more healthy you are, the
Mm-hmm.
better your physique's going to be, the stronger you're going to be. Well, why is that? Because your environment, your terrain is full of these beneficial frequencies that the water is absorbing as it's in this mode of activity. Because if water's in a stagnant state, it's not going to do anything. It's just, if anything, it's going to degrade. So it's that contraction expansion that's pulling in the beneficial energy, expelling the waste energy, and building up. It's literally expanding the molecular angle of the hydrogen molecule so that it can hold more information. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
what you're seeing. You're seeing a body that's informed, a body that's filled with light, a body that's filled with strength, energy, right?
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
what you're
Mm-hmm.
storing. And if you stop doing it, well, then it's going to deplete. Why? Because that water is your servant. That water, it's a humble servant. It will clean, feed, and protect everything in its environment, and it will do it till there's nothing left. So once
Mm-hmm.
you're in that structured state, now you're in an ideal condition. You got all this energy in your body. You can start to do all kinds of activity that's at an elevated level of what you couldn't do before. And why? Because the energy is contained within that water. And as you start to do, you know, uh, beneficial things that are expending that energy, whether it's thinking or moving, the water is feeding you that energy. And then it gets
Yeah.
to a point where it's depleted. You're fatigued. What do you need? You need more nutrients, and then you need a little, more exercise, beneficial exercise. And so that's what structured water is. It's just water that's being subjected to a contraction, expansion, centrifugal force. That could be hot and cold. Another benefit that you and your audience can relate to. There's benefits, right, to go into a cold dip and then a hot dip. And that's why. What's going on? Same thing. That
Mm-hmm.
that's creating this stress, this contraction, expansion. This stress, de-stress, and these various temperature changes. That also is inducing an energy upload into your water, which is giving you the energy, to overcome fatigue or some, medical ailment that you have. So it's all about the water absorbing the energy from the environment, whether it's the ether. And when we say ether, that's just a container. In the ether, we have various elements, and in the various foods we eat, we have different elements, and they're all doing the same thing. They're contributing through the physical is just a container of the energetics. The physical
Mm-hmm.
is there so that it can emanate the frequencies into the water and thus have its beneficial effect.